So here we go. And again, a challenge to do this in an hour. We're going to talk about World War II beginning. So 80 years from tomorrow, generally considered the 1st of September of '39 was the start of World War II. So that's why we picked that subject. And then this great airplane had such an impact on training the aviators who participated in that global conflict. We're going to talk about it. I'll give you the big picture. We've got a couple other guest speakers who are going to talk about putting an engine on that airplane, which we're doing to our other blue T-6 that's in the maintenance hangar. And then Arash is going to talk about connection. We're all volunteers. You may have heard that. We're all volunteers. Something draws us to volunteer our time and our effort to take care of the facilities, turn wrenches on the airplane, fly them. Something connects us to these old airplanes, and Arash is going to talk about that. Okay, so let's get busy. As I talked about, this is going to be kind of quick. I'm trying to give myself 10 minutes to talk about 2,100 plus days of global fighting. So I'm going to give it a try. So here's where we're going to start. There is not general consensus, though the majority of people think that World War II started on the 1st of September of '39 when Germany invaded Poland. But before that, the world was already on fire. So Japan into Manchuria, Italy was trying to flex its expansionism. They invaded Ethiopia in '35. The Spanish Civil War, that's the photo of a town in Spain. Of note there, that's where the Luftwaffe cut its teeth, was learning about its airplanes and its tactics and supporting Blitzkrieg in the Spanish Civil War. Japan back into China, and little known, Japan was fighting the Soviets and the Mongolian country there in the middle of 1939. So the world was already peaked. Okay, so I'm going to, not being a professional historian, I'm sticking with the general consensus of the 1st of September. So that's where it begins. That little schematic over there is the Westerplatte military district that's in the northeast part of Poland. And on the 1st of September, the German battleship opened up on that military district, and there was also ground assault on that. Coincident with that, the German army and the Luftwaffe attacked from the north, the south, and the west from Germany into Poland. And that's generally considered the start of World War II. So here's a big picture. I'm certainly not going to detail this, but roughly Poland here. Here's Warsaw. So the German plans, all roads led to Warsaw. Way up here is Danzig. That's where those first shots were fired. So you can see the German attack plan was Army Group North attacked. Here was the main thrust, Army Group South. And very interesting, you know, prior to this, we probably may remember where Germany was peacefully, at least for the rest of the world, annexing countries. So they went into the Sudetenland, they went into Czechoslovakia, and the Slavics fought next to them in the Battle of Poland. So that gets things started. So this is kind of my synopsis. This is Rob Hertberg's thinking of who and why. I think we know who. The Axis forces were Germany. Why did they care about this? We can go back to the Treaty of Versailles. The big thing of that, though it was very strangling on Germany, was Germany lost a lot of land under that treaty at the end of World War I. So they wanted to get it back, right? And this guy over here, he had something to do with the start of World War II as well. Japan, very interesting, back into the mid-30s as you watch the militaristic flavor and leadership of that country come to power and start driving their political way of thinking. So very militaristic, plus they started thinking that they were, they were the divine people, and they had a right to rule Asia. And then Italy. Italy, you saw back in 35, they were in Ethiopia. They wanted to expand, and they wanted to become a world power. And then the Allied forces, the United Kingdom, I put them up first, Battle of Britain, the Soviet Union, the United States, and most other countries around the globe were on the Allied side, significantly China. Okay, so I'm going to go through the major operations since we can't spend all day on this. So we talked about Poland. There's Germany invading on the 1st. You can kind of see the map. The dark gray is Germany. You see the light gray, that's Slovakia. Dark gray up here is East Prussia. So they invade from the west into the east, and on the 17th, the Soviets get in it. Remember, the German-Soviet had a non-aggression pact signed not that long before. So they want to get their piece of the pie, and they invade Poland on the 17th. And also, the Soviets invade up here into Finland a little bit later in 39. And now things really get moving. So now Poland puts up a fight, but that doesn't last too long. So now the the Wehrmacht goes west. They target France. So in May, they're going to go into France, Battle of France. They also go into the Low Countries, Belgium and Holland. That leads to the Battle of Britain after France surrenders. So that's July of 40 is the start, considered the start of the Battle of Britain. And that leads to the Blitz on London. And then later, here's the official. So that's a Japanese delegator battalion, and there's Hitler over there in September of 40, formally signing the tripartite pact. Okay, down into the Mediterranean. We've already talked about the Italian aggression in Ethiopia. Well, now they come up in Egypt. Egypt is a British colony at the time, and the Italians want a piece of that. So they invade Egypt. It takes a little while, but the British get their feet under them, and in the end of 40, they start their counteroffensive, and that's kind of the North Africa. So now the forces go east and west, as all the different forces start fighting each other. The British have some success, so now they are pushing out of Egypt west into Libya, and now the Germans come to the Italians' aid, and they're going to send Rommel, the Desert Fox, and his Africa Corps down into North Africa, and they're going to start engaging the British. So now we go to the attack on the Soviet Union. And despite the fact that they had a pact, a non-aggression pact, in the summer of 41, Germany launches our Operation Barbarossa. It's the largest invasion and the largest theater of war still in history, right? It added the Soviets to the list of allies against the Axis forces. There was more death and destruction on the Eastern Front than the rest of the war combined. The Battle of Moscow was a significant turning point in the whole war. The Wehrmacht got right up to it, but the winter and other things, logistics being one, turned the tide against them. And from this point, the Soviets, little known, the Soviets are starting to produce. Just like the United States are producing the arsenal of democracy, the Soviets are doing their part as well. You can see this plan. This is the initial March plan, so all the invasion, and like kind of all roads leading to Warsaw, all roads led to Moscow on that initial plan. Okay, and as the Russians and the Soviets get their act together and now the war progresses and they move west and push Germany back, that sets everything up for the Cold War and East versus West. Okay, I don't think I'm going to talk too much about December 7th, 1941, other than Lend-Lease and production and giving stuff to our allies. now the United States is in for good. Okay, so now as we move into 42 and 43, this is where the Allies get a little better footing, and this is where the Axis offensives stall. So we have Midway in June of 42. There's the right airplane at the right time. No kidding, not the right time in history, but the right time of day. 10:25 on that June 4th. That's the Lady Lex, the USS Lexington in the background. So now we go offensive. This place called Guadalcanal. So that's an offensive operation by the Allies. At about the same time, you know, this is the start of those things, start of Guadalcanal and the start of Stalingrad. Second El Alamein, so now the Africa Corps, the Germans have come into the North Africa, they've pushed east and pushed the British back, and now the British get a foothold and they fight back and they win the Battle of El Alamein, the second one, and now they're going to start pushing west with the Germans on the defensive. And Operation Torch is the Allied invasion of North Africa. So here's Gibraltar and the Straits and Morocco. Most of the German and British is fighting over here, Libya and Egypt, and now we're going to open up a second sub-front, if you will, and now we're going to start moving east towards the Germans. Okay, we move into 43 and 44. Here's where the Allies start to take over. The production is also certainly helping to a massive extent. Both the Soviets and the U.S. production is really starting to take effect. And what's happened now with the Allies kind of blunting the Axis offensives and their momentum, now this war is going to settle into a war of attrition. And that's just something that neither Japan nor Germany have any chance of winning, is a war of attrition against the United States production and the Soviets. So Stalingrad, this is the end game. So here's where, 600,000 Germans surrender and the Japanese leave. So that's a major defeat. Kursk. So Moscow is back up here off of the chart, as is, oh, and I'm sorry for the eye chart. This hopefully is the only eye chart I give you. Stalingrad is way over here, but here's Kursk in the middle, and this salient, as the Soviets had started their offensive, concerned the Germans. So they had this battle plan. You can see the little reddish pink there and there. They wanted to pinch off that salient, and it was bloodily repulsed by the Soviets. And one of the largest tank battles, if not the largest tank battle in history, occurred right down here on the southern salient. So the steppes, the very flat part of western Russia there, and a tank battle for the ages. And here's where we start after Guadalcanal. Sorry again for the eye chart. Here's New Guinea. Here's the Philippines over here. There, right under that little word, it says Solomon Islands is Guadalcanal. So as a big picture, we're going to start over here in the Gilberts. That's Tarara. Right up north of them is the Marshalls. That's Kwajalein and Eniwetok. And that's where we go offensive and start the island hopping campaign that the Navy did throughout the Central Pacific. Okay, so now the Allies are going to close in. So truck, we didn't invade. We just attacked from the air. So again, our production, we have this fleet that is hard to comprehend the size of the fleet and the number of carriers and airplanes. And our F-6F Hellcat is just doing some major damage to both airborne and ground-based Japanese Navy airplanes. So truck in February is 100% an aviation attack on that bastion of the Japanese Navy. And then a whole bunch of operations. So here, Bagration is a huge summer offensive. So Kursk sits about in there. Moscow's way back here, so you can see the Soviets are pushing west, and Bagration was a major backbreaker. Overlord, I'm sure we've all seen this photograph. I go back, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes prior to this photograph and think, what were those infantry troops thinking with that steel door up in front of them as they're seconds away from it dropping? What were they thinking? Amazing. Okay, Forager is where we go offensive now in, here are the Philippines, and here are the Marianas, so Guam, Saipan, and Tinian. And this is where the Battle of the Philippine Sea occurred, where the Japanese launched carriers, again, carrier airplane versus carrier airplane. And our Hellcats and all of our ships and the screening and the AAA firing up just ravaged those offensive sweeps of the Japanese. And then later in 44, we actually land, so here's MacArthur returning to the Philippines. And at this point, it's hopeless. So Iwo Jima, Berlin, right? That was the Soviet Army, the Battle of Berlin, Okinawa. Little known, the amphibious assault of Okinawa was larger than D-Day into the Normandy coast. Okay, German surrender, Bumba, and then here's the Japanese surrender, right? Officially, what, August 14th or 15th was the declaration, and then the formal ceremony on top of the Missouri. Okay, little known, this Operation Downfall was the impending invasion of the home islands. So the planning for it was well underway in August when we dropped the 2 atomic weapons, as we were preparing to have to go all the way, because there were no signs at the time that the Japanese were going to surrender. So the overall thing was called Downfall. In November, Operation Olympic was going to come into the southern island, Kyushu, and then in March, Coronet was going to come and land forces in the Tokyo area. So this plan was well underway, and a scale of which it's just hard to comprehend. If we go back a year to our offenses in the Marianas, Guam, Tinian, Saipan, we had 1 fleet. The 5th Fleet when it was under Spruance, the 3rd Fleet when it was under Halsey. By the time this would have rolled around, we had enough ships to have 2 full fleets, the 3rd and the 5th at one time. All right, the map. So green, kind of the good guys, red and orange, the bad guys, and neutral or Vichy. You know, the war did not get over here too much. Yeah, there was some shelling of the West Coast. But if you look in, you know, Europe and parts of North Africa and then all the way over in Pacific, there was a lot of this globe under Axis control for a period of time. Here are the deaths. Ouch. So though there are a lot of things, what I'll point out is, you know, if you look at the red and orange, that's the millions of people. So the Soviet Union lost almost 24 million people. China next. But if you look at the blue lines, is the percentage of the total population of those countries. And here Poland, where things started, that's almost 20% of their population was killed. Just another depiction, all by percentage. So over here, greater than 10%, so the black and this dark maroon. So the Soviets took the blunt. I said that in that earlier slide, that the Eastern Front there, more death and destruction there than everywhere else. And it shows in here. Just brutal loss. A lot down here in the Japanese. That one dot is Saipan. This dot over here is Tarawa. So air power, what are some things that came of that global catastrophe? You know, as we look from World War I and into the interwar years and now World War II, air power came of age and really made an impact, a significant impact in the outcome of the war. So missions were defined and advanced. These weren't necessarily new, but they got further delineated. What does it mean to be a fighter and a bomber and attack and ground support? There was innovation, airlift. That proved vital. We got to get men and equipment and supplies somewhere right now. So not only airlift, but also the logistics of prioritizing those logistics. Who gets what first? We can't meet every commander's needs right now for beans and bullets or landing craft or airplanes. So now we have to prioritize. The strategic bombing. Though in the interwar years, this thing called the Air Tactical School, Army Air Force, had doctrine. That was the doctrine. Who's heard the bomber's always going to get through was a kind of a mantra, a bumper sticker for the Army Tactical School. We don't need fighters or escort. Our bombers are going to have machine guns, and they're going to get through, and they're going to destroy what they attack. Well, the early strategic campaign out of Europe or England into Germany, 42, early 43, that didn't fare too well. The attrition rates of those bombers getting shot down was horrific. So they had to modify. Weapons advances, obviously, right? So cluster bombs, incendiaries. Who knew that napalm was first used in World War II? I did not. And obviously the atomic weapons. And there were astonishing technical advances in that short period of time. So from biplanes, the Chinese had biplane fighters on the front line when the Zeros attacked in late 30s. All the way to B-29, so ocean spanning airplanes delivering atomic weapons. Radar. Remember the British. Radar was not new at the start of World War II, but it advanced. And the British used it to great effect in Battle of Britain. But they were big towers, and in a very short period of time, they were put into the nose of a relatively small airplane. Radar. Engines. I'll use the Spitfire as an example. The prototype had a 1,000 horsepower inline engine. At the end of the war, this thing was flying Griffin engines upwards of 2,400 horsepower. So that's a 240% increase in horsepower in 5 years. And then jets, right? First jet flew in 42. And by the end of the war, the Me-262 was making a minor impact in the war, but the jets were on the horizon right at the end of the war. Questions on World War II? I took longer than 10 minutes, but okay, I did good. Hopefully I hit the high points and the big things. Now we're going to adjust, and we're going to talk about this airplane. Why? Well, we're kind of highlighting the start of World War II, so we're going to focus on one of the most prolific trainers, which is where an aviator would start, with the trainer. So that's the connection I'm hoping I'm making. Okay? One of the most prolific military trainers of all time. It was termed, so many countries used it for so long that it was termed the world's advanced trainer. Okay, as you can see, single engine, tandem seat, typically the student in the front, the instructor in the back, low wing cantilever. Cantilever means the wing is not supported by anything, it supports itself. Okay, it filled the need for a basic combat trainer, and it was named the pilot maker because it gave so many of the pilots their wings and then prepped them for the more advanced combat airplanes. So I'm not going to go through every model of the airplane, but I am going to start with a prototype, all the way back to 35. It had a Wright engine in it, 400 horsepower, and you can see fixed landing gear, and it was fabric covered. Now, for those of you who noticed, North American did eventually put a propeller on it. Okay, now that was the prototype. I am going to jump all the way to the airplanes that we had. So there was an AT-6A and a B, and now here's the C. And the AT-6C, coincident with the SNJ-4, now there's the NA. It's interesting, and that's what this picture is here for. If you can see right there the difference in the aluminum, this empennage was made as one piece and then connected to the forward part of the airplane right here. Well, early in the war, as you can imagine, there was a shortage of raw materials, and a training airplane was pretty low on the priority list to get aluminum. So there's a bulk of AT-6Cs that had wood empennages because the aluminum and the other metals went to higher priority requirements. It's also, the C model is where a lot of the specific needs of the services and their training needs move to a swiveling rear seat. So see how the rear canopy goes completely forward, and now the seat swivels back and you can train the rear gunners. As an example, the 4C had a tail hook that's set right in front of the tail wheel for carrier qualification. So now from the C model, we go over to the D. It added a 24-volt EC, but more important, it was the first common airplane between the Army Air Force and the Navy. Previously, there had always been some difference, mainly of which was the engine. The Navy singles engine airplane had some safety features on their Pratt & Whitney 1340 to give it a little safety buffer for overwater ops. Well, by this time, it was complete, other than the zinc chromate corrosion control that the Navy would put on theirs, it was exactly the same airplane. So, who wants a hat? Okay, I'm going to go backwards. I talked about there was an A and a B. Here's the C. Here's the D. Somebody tell me, who wants a hat? What was the AT-6E? I'll give you one clue. It was the XAT-6E. They put an inline engine in it. Okay, so who thinks that's ugly? I needed another hat anyway. Okay, never went into production, but you know, if you're not trying, you're not trying. All right, real fast, now we go to the F model. It's pretty here. They made some minor changes to it. Here's the G, the T-6G. North American didn't manufacture any T-6Gs. They took C's and D's and F's that were in the best shape that the Navy and the Army Air Force said, these are our best conditioned, and they refurbished them, if you will. So they put bigger tanks in it, improved cockpit. You can really see this really nice, you see there's no, see the braces that are in the middle of this airplane's canopy? Well, they took those out, so they simplified the canopy. So here's the LT-6G. This is now, we've gone past World War II. They've kept these airplanes because they trained so well. And we flew them in Korea in combat. So we put some extra ordnance on it. It flew battlefield surveillance and forward air control. Training, to surmise this stuff, okay? It really excelled at what it did. And that's why there are so many of them that lasted into the 50s when jets were starting to take over. It was the perfect bridge to the higher performance fighters. And there's this saying right here, which really has, it's a bit humorous, but it also has a shred of truth. If you could fly a T-6, the Mustang and the Thunderbolt were easy to fly. The T-6 really made you do its thing. Some factoids, a lot of them were built. And look how many are still flying. 34 countries, known by a whole bunch of different names. It flew combat in Korea, and it stayed in the South African Air Force until '95. So a huge impact. Go back to one of my earlier slides, one of the most prolific military trainers of all time. Okay, I was asked to do a brief about what's the difference between all these training aircraft, at least in the military flight training program early in the war and through most of the war, where we started in primary trainers, PT, went to basic trainers, and then we went to advanced trainers. So you can see this up here. A student pilot got about 200 hours, and it was relatively evenly split between the 3 different phases. And here's a comparison. So here's again, the primary all the way down to the AT6 on the weight. Look how the weight almost tripled. The horsepower almost tripled. The top speed more than doubled. And now you get to see it's simple, no flaps or landing gear, and now you've got both. And so we can go all the way through this and look how on training, right, everyone got, in all phases, did formation. Formation flying in the military is an important fact, okay? But how we did none of the more advanced training in the PT, but by the time we get to the advanced, we're doing all of it, to include gunnery and aerobatics. So what we're going to do now is we're going to bring up Joe, and our group here, our volunteers, have been putting an engine on our other SNJ, and Joe's going to talk to you a little bit about it.
Thank you, Rob. So I'm one of many volunteers that are involved in working in the maintenance shop, and I just want to point out all the people who have worked on this plane. It's quite a long list. It's a team effort to really get this done. So the engine needed to be rebuilt, so it was pulled, it was sent to Anderson Aeromotive up in Idaho to get rebuilt, and when it came back, you've got to get it ready. So the first thing we did was get the starter mounted. We get the manuals out, because you always have to work off the manuals to make sure that we're doing it correctly. And then we're ready to start putting it on. So the first thing we've got to do is get the engine bolts in place. Have to install the heat shield and the spacers, and then finally you get it mounted on the forklift and start levering it into position. As you can see, the plane is tilted back about 5 degrees, and so you've got to get the engine mounted to go over the bolts. You install the ground wires, you put the nuts to hold it in place, and then you remove all the lifting hardware. Now you start the fun part of getting your hands inside here and tightening the bolts, get them safetied, and you're ready to go. Next time though, we're gonna put a little mark on those bolts so we know exactly where the holes are, to make it easier to get the cotter pins in there and get everything lined up. And it's one of those little learning experiences that I don't think we'll do it the hard way next time. All right, so now we're gonna go around the engine in front of the heat shield and start finishing things out. So we install the spark plugs, we put the primer line through the baffles, and then we install the baffles that go on top of the cylinder heads. While we're in the front, we get the front spark plugs and the wires on. We get the baffles in place that go between the cylinders. But next time, we're going to do all this stuff on the ground before we mount the engine on the plane, because then it's a lot easier to get to. Once everything on the front of the engine is mounted, we can safely put the prop on, and then safety the hardware that attaches the prop. And Keith Bailey is our resident expert on props, so he was instrumental for getting that done. So now we're going to finish out the behind the engine. We're going to mount the exhaust to the engine, and then we connect the collector pipes together. And so now the exhaust is all put together. And then that heat is contained within the exhaust shields, and those are screwed and put into place with quarter-turn fasteners, Zeus fasteners. And now we can start putting the accessories on. So now we're behind the heat shield in the accessory bay, and we start mounting things. So, and all these things need to be mounted afterwards because they won't fit through the engine mount. The engine mount is too small. So the first thing is the carburetor. We get that in place and connect the throttle linkage. And then we're going to go to the top of the engine, and looking from the cockpit, we're going to go around the left side of the engine and mount all the accessories. So we've got the generator on top. We mount that, connect the wiring. And then we go down a little bit, we're going to mount the hydraulic pump. And then just below that, we're going to mount the vacuum pump and then the fuel pump. And now we're going to go to the other side of the accessory bay, and we're going to get the tachometer attached. That includes the generator, the drive that goes to the engine, and then the wiring that goes back to the cockpit. And now we need to start attaching all these accessories, but we want new hoses because it's a fresh installation, so we've got to learn and then assemble all the AN fittings on the hoses, oil, fuel, hydraulic. And so now we're going to go to the right side of the plane and start attaching the instruments and everything else. So from the top to the bottom, right under the engine mount, there's the connection for the manifold pressure, and then there's the hose for the primer line, then the oil pressure line, which is both a oil line, liquid line, and then it's got a little electrical sensor there too. And then the bottom one in red is the fuel pressure. And then in front, where you can't really see it very well, is a temperature sensor for the oil. And now we can start connecting all the accessory hoses. So the big yellow tank in the back is the oil tank. So we need to connect the hoses to the oil, to connect the oil tank to the pumps, and then we connect the fuel lines, which are down below, and then the hydraulic lines and the vacuum lines. And we'll get to see all of this later on when you come out and view the plane up close. So now we need to add the fluids. Oil goes in the big yellow tank, and it's a straight or mineral oil for a break-in period. Then the hydraulic oil is underneath the cockpit. That's a standard 5606 fluid. And then, of course, before you try and start it, you got to put fresh aviation gas in there. Battery, so that you can start it. And it's disconnected because we put the battery in place before we were done connecting everything, and you don't want it to accidentally start turning on you. And this is a radial engine thing. Right under the main crankcase on the oil sump, there's a penny safetied in, and the date on the penny is the date of the engine installation. So this case is 2019. And so this is a special video. I was lucky enough to be here on Tuesday when we did the engine start. So that's Matt in the plane and Mike pressing a lever to get the starter to engage. We weren't quite ready. Go ahead. Yay. We got the engine started. It's very exciting because this is about 4 months worth of work. Needless to say, we're all very happy about this. It's really nice to put all this effort into it and see it run.
Thank you, Joe. Awesome. Engine's running. Woo! That's not an easy thing. Okay, so now we're going to go to Arash. He's going to talk about some of the people and the airplanes and the connection.
My name is Arash Afshari. I've been a docent here for about 4 years, and I've had the privilege to be around these airplanes. Let's be clear about what I'm not. I'm not an aviator. I'm not a mechanic. So all the things you heard from Joe, I know nothing about. Certainly don't know how to fly them. So why am I up here? Rob asked me to make the human connection, and my wife, when she heard that, she said, "You better jump on. It's the last time you're going to get counted as a member of the species." Thank you. So the human connection. Why do we care about the T6s? You know, why are we here? Why do people come? I have just a few pictures to show you, and I'm going to try and go through this as fast as I can, and some videos for those of you who haven't been around them or seen them flying. Our beautiful bluebird, SNJ as we like to call it.
The love of that era and a way to remember.
You think that's a common thing with other people who own those kinds of
Yeah, I think, or work on them or volunteer just to be around them. There's a connection of some, you know, it could be 100 different kinds of connections with the airplanes and what they represent and what they did and the people who did it in them. You know, it's a connection with the past. It's a connection with a history that has kind of shaped our country as it is now. The military aspect of that, since, you know, to be a warbird, it needs to have been in the military in the past. And I think there's a connection to the past that I kind of mentioned that is hard to define, but kind of bubbles up inside people.
Is operating and flying a T-6 today still as relevant to flying other warbirds as it used to be?
It is. You know, I'll use my experience. I flew high-performance jets in the Air Force, and it's different. There's so much that's done for you as far as stick and rudder, flying the airplane in these highly complex airplanes. Where these airplanes like here, it's basics. It's stick and rudder and making the airplane do what you want it to do.
So
It's back to the basics of flying.
give me in 3 words or less what you love about the T-6. I mean, if you were gonna be a
Makes you
salesman.
fly.
Hmm?
Makes you fly.
Makes you fly.
So that's Rob unscripted, which he's very good at, although he won't admit it. What I was asking him is, why are these planes still relevant? I'm sorry, the audio on that was really bad, but I hope you heard it. And he was talking about the connection to the past, the connection to the history of this country. And for me, I mean, I wasn't even born in this country, you might have guessed with my name, but it's still relevant to my history because that conflict shaped the entire world, my part of the world included. So when we think about the T-6s, me as a layperson, this is what the images that conjure up in our minds. You know, fields of hundreds and hundreds of T-6s, young men. I used to be one of those. I used to imagine myself flying one of these. But then I became a father, and my son was 19, and I don't know about yours, I hope yours was better, but mine was terribly inept, and I thought, oh my God, you know, they were sending 19-year-olds out to fly these things. I'm glad they did it back then, because mine wouldn't stand a chance. So when we look at these T-6s, this is what we're thinking about, you know, again, as a layperson. One of my favorite pictures of the war, I don't know who this lady is, but I don't know about you guys, but when I look at old images, I kind of stare at it for a little while, and I try to put myself in that moment and just imagine what happened 3 seconds before and 10 seconds after. And once you've been around these airplanes here at a place like this, you're more able to do that. But that's how you mount the airplane. She does it very well. You know, you go up that way, stand up on the wing, turn around, so there's a foothold to put on, swing your leg over, get in the back seat. A lot easier when you're 19. No, sandals. And see, now I'm going, yeah, no high heels, so I'm going to go off script a little bit and talk about all these pin-up pictures that happen on warbirds. I personally, even though I call myself a photographer, I don't like that at all because it's not authentic. That is authentic, and that's what makes her so much more appealing than I am. Right. So and there's lots of pictures out there of them being worked on. In this case, being cleaned. And so when we come to see a museum and we see something like this, Keith Bailey working on the engine on 290, we see this, and Keith, you know, he was probably 49 in that picture, but in our minds, we see that really. So they're connected to the history of flying, and then sometimes the connections are a little bit more immediate. Here's Al and Ken. I'm working on 290, and you start taking something apart, and there's a signature in there. Dorothy Gardner, November 1954. So how much more immediate can you get with a connection to the past? You have to wonder who Dorothy was, how much work did she do to it, what did she actually do? Did she get to fly in it after? You know, when you start looking at things like that, and especially after you have a couple of beers, these things, you know, become alive in your mind, much more so than just sheet metal and aluminum. So people come from all over to be near these airplanes. This is obviously an exaggeration. This was just a sea of people at an air show right here. But I bet you if you added up all the people who have come to see these airplanes and fly in it, you would have a crowd multiple times bigger than that. And of course they come because there's the P-51. We're lucky to have two of North America's best here at this museum. You have the P-51 and you have the T-6. Well, the P-51 is a little bit intimidating for some people, but the T-6 is much more approachable as a flight platform. So it has an appeal in that way. And when they look at it, this is what they're, again, imagining in their minds. That's what I do anyway. This happens to be a backseat of a P-51, but you know, maybe you're touching a T-6 Maybe you're going to go for a ride in the T6, but in your mind you're going to be in the Mustang winning the war for us, you know. And when they come for the flights, they like to talk about it. Sometimes it's hard to get them to leave. And one thing we have going for us here, we have good pilots who are good at their craft, but they're also very good hosts. And they don't mind spending extra time talking about what it takes to actually fly these things. And I've been told, again, not an aviator, that each one of these T6s is different. You know, they all fly differently, they all have their own personalities, and I believe it. It's just fun to be around and watch these things happen. People come, and, you know, they take their flights, and then they want to take a picture with the pilot in front of the airplane for themselves, or maybe when they bought a ride for their son. Sometimes they bring the whole family. I don't know which one of these guys got on, but and I don't know about you, but I have a similar picture of a flight I took in a Waco airplane, you know, decades ago, and took a picture of in front of the plane that's on my shelf. So, you know, it's again kind of fun to remember that in a way we become part of their family once they've been through here in their photo album. And then surprisingly to me, the veterans come and they want to pose in front of the T6. I don't remember who was who, but he was obviously a fighter pilot. And I asked them, I was like, why the T6? You know, we have a Mustang right here, we have a Hellcat right here. And, you know, stupid me, the answer is, well, that was my first airplane. You never forget your first airplane. I want to touch the T6 because in their mind, again, they're back to being 19 and a little scared and everything that ensued after that. So that was something that was new to me. One of the anecdotes, I don't remember which one of these gentlemen it was, but I was actually a gunner, a waist gunner in a bomber, and he was talking about flying in a T6, and I was surprised to hear that. And he said, well, the last bit of gunnery practice that we got was in the back seat of a T6, and I was standing up shooting either at a flying drone or a stationary object on the ground, I don't know which. And he said, it's a good thing I was tall, because, you know, we had a belt tying us to the floor of this thing, and if you didn't cinch that just right, as soon as you had shot your load, the pilots wanted to get the heck out of there. So they would just nose it down, negative G's, and out they go. And if you were short and you hadn't tightened that belt, you would almost feel like you're falling out. So that was the one memory that he had from his gunnery practice. We only did it once. We did a lot of ground schooling and so forth, but then his last bit was up here. It was one of these guys, I don't remember which one. So besides all that, you know, North American, back then a lot of airplanes are so beautiful. Not to disparage the jets that fly today, but they're so technical, they're so perfect, they're designed by computers. These were drawn and designed by human beings and eyes and sensibility. So they're just beautiful airplanes, and they make beautiful foregrounds, even for things ugly like F-18s. And they make beautiful backgrounds. And sometimes people like to pose on them. I mean, I don't know who was the photographers, if they were focusing on the girl or the plane, but I'd like to think it was the plane. And then, of course, you've been to air shows, and this is what starts to get you. So it's that start, you know, and if you're close enough to it when it starts up, you don't just hear it, you feel it. And once you've felt it once, then you want to get that again. Yeah, it's hard to get over it once you've seen it that way. I'm just going to show a couple of quick pictures about these airplanes. We have two of them, as you've figured out by now, Bluebird SNJ-4 and 290 traditional yellow. I heard at an air show, an announcer said, oh, you know, they were painted yellow because, you know, they were training aircraft, and so when they crashed out there, they could go find the wreckage by the color, as if the pall of smoke was not going to be enough of a road sign of where to find it. They were yellow because they were trainers, and visibility was important. The pattern was busy. They needed to be able to see each other, so they painted them bright yellow, or, you know, very, you know, something that stood out yellow. So the fact that we have a blue one is unusual, and we kind of like it like that. I think Ron's going to be here to talk about these airplanes. No. So then I'll tell you this, I hope it's true. I had heard that Bluebird was the personal plane for some admiral somewhere. And I guess if you get to be an admiral, you can paint your plane any color you damn well please. And he went blue, and I thank him for it. It's really pretty. This is a sunset picture, you know, full disc and the sun glistening off of the thing. It's just pretty. It's just hard to take a bad picture of these airplanes. And they have a tendency to make every setting just a little bit better. That's our third North American plane in the background, by the way, the B-25 or PBJ. And they're all obviously very aerobatic also. We don't fly them like that for rides, but they are being used for aerobatic shows by others, and they're very capable. Right, so you see them in the air shows, they look pretty, you maybe heard them start up, and then you hardly see them fly because they're utilitarian airplanes. You know, they're the platform for photography, so there's very few videos of them actually in the air. But we see them fly overhead, and this is kind of the image that conjures up in our mind, and what compels us to come around and see it and be with it and maybe get a flight in it. It's Mike Cole's flying the 290 in formation with some T-34s. And here it is flying alongside the PBJ. The motor noise here is actually the PBJ, the V-25. So those are the things that bring people to want to fly these things. And you know, I talked to you a little bit about a couple of the veterans that I've met, and you know, I could go on for hours. Trust me. I've only been given 10 minutes, and I've probably outrun it already. But here's an interesting character. He'll tell you why he's here to take a flight on the SNJ. Tell me about the scarf.
The scarf is my father's World War II formal naval scarf, and we lost him about 4 years ago along with my mother. And the whole idea was we got into riding roller coasters, and it kind of ended up, now we're here. This is our roller coaster gear. When I saw the air show was in town, I'm like, we got to do it.
This is your way of keeping his memory alive.
Everybody's.
So I don't know if you heard it, but the scarf was his grandfather's Navy scarf. Here's somebody else's.
How was it?
Friggin' terrific.
I didn't know what he was going to say. But, you know, typically, I mean, those are the extremes a little bit, but that's what it's like. And it's just wonderful. The planes are wonderful. The people who come, you know, they tell you their stories. It's hard not to be moved by it. And just what a beautiful silhouette on that airplane. So, let's go for a ride. You know, we're not going to go for an aerobatic ride, but this is just a couple of short videos of what it's like to go up as a ride participant. That's about as aggressive as we get with riders, unfortunately. But even that's pretty fun. Nice way to see the coastline. So you saw I included 2 takeoffs and a landing, those are the most important parts in that thing. But really, I had 2 things to say about that. First of all, the darn things aren't built for comfort. That wasn't. So our rides are like 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes for a rider, and that's plenty. The gentleman who was going for the flight with the scarf talked about roller coasters. If I can put these flights in terms of roller coasters, you guys been to Disney. Let's see, the Mustang would be, is it California Screamin', when the thing gets boost and takes off and can roll and fast. And the Flying Zephyr, those balloons that go around, that would be the PT-19. It's nice and gentle. You can put your arms out if you like. This thing is like the Runaway Railroad. It's jarring, it's loud, it rattles around, and when you come out and if you still got all your fillings in your mouth, you're happy to get off and you still feel it for a few minutes after you walking away. It's a lot of fun. So flying a long distance in it is actually very tiring. So our short rides are just perfect. And then the other thing I'll say, the most fun I had actually in one of these things was one of our pilots, who I won't name, was going for a landing check, I think. I forget what the term for it was. He had to shoot some landings to stay current. And I said, well, I'd love to go. I was like, oh, sure, come on. We went. And that was the most fun we had. All we did was take off, go around the pattern, come back, touch down, and land. 3 or 4 times. It was great. Except the very first one, I was sitting in the back and he was coming in to land and I heard him fumble, and he says, forget it. He was a little bit more colorful. And I thought, no, don't forget it. Find what it is you're looking for, please. So whatever he was looking for, he didn't find, but it went just great, and he found it the second time around. But for a non-flyer in the back, I was like, But that was the most fun I've had in this thing, just going around the patch and landing. And that smile is genuine. I mean, really, you feel like that. I think he was flying as a tribute to his father, so who knows what was going on in his mind while he was up there, but he's happy to be back. And those sentiments are genuine. Right. The thing is also, as you saw, very acrobatic. And so this is our own Jason and Chris DeGore flying this thing. And this is just a short snippet of a couple of loops. Again, we don't do that with riders, but it's good to see that it can do that. So a very capable aircraft, and as I said, the best purpose it serves is to put people in touch with things that are emotional for them, whether it's a family member or just a love of aviation. But it still does serve a purpose. Its top speed is high enough that it can be matched by the slowest speed of say, a P-51, or where you have some time where you're close to one another. So it can be used as a platform for aerial photography. And so that's the office, I've had the luck and the privilege to be in the back seat of that thing with the canopy open, trying to take pictures of other airplanes in the air. It's a lot more difficult than I ever thought it was going to be. Mostly because of, like I said, it's shaky, and not good for comfort. There's no compartments where you can put all the junk you have to carry, and if you drop something, there's really no floor to it. It just goes down to the bottom of the airplane and just goes out the back. So it's a good way to lose a lens cap. Or if you drop a water bottle, then you worry about, is it going to roll in the front and get in the way of the pilot's operating of the airplane? So, those are my excuses for having out of focus pictures. But that's the space that you have to shoot from. And of course you think, well, great, you're in there, your door open, and this is your view. That's what I thought it was going to be like. But a short video of the thing actually being used. So this is actually not, this is a GoPro camera mounted on the top of this airplane. That's why it's a little shaky. This is the view that you get from the inside of the airplane. That darn wing must be essential to flight, I don't know, but it's in the way a lot. All airplanes seem to have them, so it's got to serve a purpose. And there's all this superstructure. There's the rollover T-bar, it gets in the way. And now this was a GoPro camera that was mounted on top of my camera as I was taking pictures. And as you know, GoPros have a very wide field of view. So there's actually less room than what this makes it look like. And those airplanes are a lot closer than, again, what this makes it look like, because this is wide angle. And if you're like me and you have a weak constitution, you better have that bag handy when you're trying to do this. But it's a lot of fun. A Veterans Memorial flight over Santa Barbara. So yeah, that's the space you have to shoot from, and I'll tell you a little anecdote from that. Is, when your canopy is open, you've got a lens that is about this big maybe, so you can have a chance of getting close to those airplanes for photos. And if you're not careful and you get out of the protection of the canopy, the slipstream will hit it. At 150 miles an hour, that's quite a lot of force. That'll push it around. So that's what happened in that flight. We had, pre-flighted that thing. And so we'd come out with a shorthand language of what to say to get closer, to get farther away, to get higher, to get lower. These were going to be some award-winning pictures. But as I started, the wind got the lens, so I leaned back. And when I leaned back, then the head went in the slipstream, and there went the headset right off my head. Over the side, and it was still hanging on with the plug where it was plugged in, so I fished it back in hoping it was still good, and it wasn't. So tapped Kurt on the shoulder and said, all bets are off, let's just do the best we can. So a great big thank you to everybody who maintains and loves these airplanes and flies them, to make them available for people like me, who just love to be around them, love to look at them, and have had the privilege to talk to people who the thing has more meaning in their lives than it does for me. I mean, that's been wonderful to be around. Since Ron apparently isn't going to be here, I'll just say a couple of things I know about our airplanes. They do have a long history. Besides having served through the war in the Navy, teaching pilots how to fly, 290 went all the way to Japan and was part of the Japanese Naval Defense, Home Defense Forces before it came back here. And I was looking forward to hear from Ron if that Dorothy Gardner signature in '54 was before it went out, when it was refurbished, or after it came back. I don't know. And that's the association with the far past. And then Bluebird is a closer association to the not so far past, because a very dear friend of ours was pivotal in getting that thing restored. So when we see that thing fly, we think about our great friend Joe Pepito, who's no longer with us. And I'll just leave you with kind of a goodbye video of the thing. Flying off in, or landing in this case, into the sunset. And I wish that sound was my ringtone on my phone. Thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you so much for joining us on this Labor Day weekend. And again, in about 10 minutes, those interested who want to go take a look at Joe's work and everybody else who has helped put an engine on Bluebird, we're going to join over here by the cookies in about 10 minutes. Thank you very much.